Welcome back to another episode of Gimme Some Truth. I am Alicia Vandeven, and I am joined in the booth today with Notesong Srisopark-Thompson. She is an estate planning attorney. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and where you work?
Yes, and I want to compliment you for saying my name correctly. Thank you. That really happens. So I'm an estate planning attorney with the law firm Laffey, Sebranek, Auby, and Ristau. And I've been doing estate planning for several years, and I am also a nurse, a pediatric nurse first. I was in the medical field, and it's just really a perfect marriage because I give TLC to my clients.
I love that. What made you decide to go into estate planning?
I had a good friend that asked me if I wanted to start a firm, a remote firm, and we kind of dove in. But I've always really liked it. It was one of my favorite classes. My professor, Howie Erlanger, he's like, he's amazing. And he always told us, almost in every class, when you're explaining estate planning concepts and documents to your clients, use plain language. Use plain, simple language that is understandable. And so I've always strived to do that. But it's just a topic that's relatable because I think everybody needs a will, at the very least.
Yeah, definitely. And we, at Wagner Condon, for our clients, we work with estate planning attorneys quite often. It's something that's a very important piece of a client's financial plan. And typically after our clients work with an estate planning attorney, sometimes we send them, say, go work with an estate planning attorney, and then they'll come back. And we want to make sure that whatever they decided, their accounts, their financial plan reflect what's in their estate planning documents, whether that's retitling accounts in the name of a trust, updating beneficiaries, whatever that looks like. We want to be sure that their financial plan matches their estate plan. Yep. And we unfortunately, and I'm sure you see this as well, you see what's on the other side of it when people don't take the time. They avoid creating an estate plan, and then they pay for it on the other side. And losing somebody is hard enough, but then if you add on to that, trying to deal with, not a well thought out plan, or if there's no plan, or if there's no will, or beneficiaries are incorrect, that can make it even more difficult.
Right. And it's just music to my ears. It makes me so happy to hear you saying all this because I have a statistic for you. The 2024 statistic of Americans who have an estate plan is only 34%. Less than half of U.S. citizens, right? Like they don't have an estate plan.
Now, is that something beyond a will, or is that many Americans just don't even have a basic will?
Just a basic will. And I'll just put it that, if you have kids, you need a will.
Yeah.
If you have pets, although that's another tricky area because states define pets as property, or I don't know. I think that they're part of our family. Yeah. But if you want to put directions in there on who's going to be your pet guardian, or if you want to leave money for your pet, it's just as important as
to ensure they're taken care of.
Yeah.
Yes.
And most importantly, you've worked so hard. You go to work every day. You burn the midnight oil. You want to decide who's going to get your stuff.
Yeah.
And by stuff, I mean your estate.
Yeah. What do you think is the biggest hang-up that's preventing people from creating an estate plan?
Gosh. Biggest? There's so many. But I would say the top three is just like people want to avoid it because it's a miserable topic. It's awful, horrible, terrible to think about. And that just stops people in their tracks from doing it. Little superstition maybe. If I create this, then something bad's going to happen. And then I would say the second thing would be cost. A lot of people are turned off by the cost, and then there's already that stereotype of lawyers that maybe they're intimidating and it's expensive. But what is important to remember is that having an estate plan, or basic will even, powers of attorney, drafted by an attorney who knows the state law and is licensed in that state is so important, because if it's not properly drafted and executed, terrible word in estate planning. I always just apologize for that. Signed, dated, notarized. If it's not properly done, or you have the wrong witnesses, it's not valid. Yeah. It's not legally valid. And then the state gets to decide. So the state has a will for everybody, and that's if you die, what's called intestate. And they have a whole scheme for whether your parents get it or your siblings, and so, but you don't get to decide.
Right.
And
so if you don't decide, the state will decide for you.
Well, and if you have let's say your parents aren't around, and you have, a couple sisters, and one of the sisters is really rotten, guess what? She gets 50% of the remainder of your estate, and that feels icky.
Yeah.
So the cost, although with parents too, they'll drop lately like $700 on a stroller to make sure it has leather on the handles, and I'm like, the baby doesn't know that that's leather, but they'll know who raised them when they get older, and you want to make sure your kids have a guardian who's going to raise them the way that you would.
Yeah.
That's the most important. My kids are my greatest assets. They just don't have dollar signs.
Yes.
So.
Well, I feel like a lot of people, once they have kids, they know they should put together an estate plan. Yeah. So that's sort of the trigger point for people if they haven't already put together any type of will or estate plan. Having children is usually the point where people start to go, okay, I should probably put together an estate plan. And with the idea being, if something happens to me, I want to be sure not only are my kids taken care of financially, but that is what gives you the opportunity to appoint a guardian. Otherwise, the court will decide who cares for your kids, whether that's your parents or your partner's parents or, sister, brother, whoever that is. And if you want to be able to determine who's caring for your child, you need a legally binding document that will clearly state who does that. And the other thing that people don't realize is that people don't need to choose the person who manages your children's money while they're still minors doesn't need to be the same person as who takes care of them.
Correct. And in some situations, you want to have those guardrails up, kind of a safety check and balance between the guardian and the person who's managing your kid's trust. And trust is a funny word because absolutely you need to pick somebody that you trust. That is the basis for all the nominees for your key decision makers. That's what we like to call them at our firm. But yeah, that's the thing. It's if you don't have a plan in place for your kids and somebody who can help them manage their finances, and you're not picking somebody you trust who has similar financial sensibility, right? It's gonna, and we have to put again more guardrails on what can the trustees spend on that.
Yeah.
And then people get confused easily because the legal community likes to use the same word for different things, and sometimes Latin words. It makes it even more exciting. Sounds very fancy. But if you don't understand what's needed or maybe a good age to set those milestones at, they get everything at 25, which is based on science. Your frontal lobe isn't developed. I bought a pair of skis on State Street from a very expensive sporting store with my first credit card, mostly to impress my now husband. He didn't care that they were rainbow colored.
Yeah.
But things like that. I mean, if something tragic were to happen, you want to make sure that money goes towards their education. Or maybe if they're not scholarly directed, they want to start a business or they need a car. Let's put that towards the first deposit for their car.
So I think you're touching on something that is what actually prevents people from going and doing this, is that it's overwhelming. There's a lot of decisions to be made. Yeah. And if people can barely even decide who will take care of their kids when they die or if they die, then making all those decisions in addition to that, like that decision itself is scary enough. Yeah. And sometimes people don't want to be in the position where they have to make those decisions. They don't want to think about it. Right. And then they get overwhelmed by the thought of having to sit down with somebody and not only decide who's going to care for your kids if something happens to you, but then who's going to take care of the money? And then what age do they get it? And what if this? And what if this? And what the worst question for me that was asked when I was going through this is, well, what do you want to happen to your assets if you and your husband and your children pass away? And I said, no, thanks.
Yeah.
I don't want to think about that.
People shut down.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to somebody to sort of maybe overcome some of those barriers of maybe being overwhelmed or I don't even know where to begin, right? Yeah. I know I need this, but where do I even start?
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, kind of like what I tell my kids when they go into the basketball court, 99% of this is mental. Like you just got to go in there like, I'm doing it, it's time, because if not now, when? And in the land of wills, A is there's no basis for A is for is you get effort. You know? What is that saying? There's no A for effort in the land of wills. That's it.
Okay.
There's no effort. There's no. What did I just say?
There's no A for effort in the land of wills?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because if there's not a legally binding document, you don't get points for having thought about it at some point.
Right. I even got overwhelmed by that saying. But
yeah.
But yeah, that's the thing. It's a mindset thing, right? You have to be willing to do it. But a lot of times, I mean, my husband and I drafted our estate planning documents 19 years ago. And I recommend to my clients, you should review your documents, and if you need to make changes and get them amended. Another thing that people don't understand, it's not one and done. You can amend your documents as long as they're not an irrevocable document. So that's a whole other area. But yeah, you can amend your documents because there are life shifts, right?
Yep.
I mean, again, like maybe the sister-in-law was really nice, or you thought, and then she turned rotten.
Yeah.
Right? Or one of your
relationships change.
They do.
Yeah.
Or one of your key decision makers who you named as a trustee for your kids' trust develop a gambling habit because they fell on hard times. Like, oh, I don't think it's a good idea for that person to manage my kids' financial, or something.
Or maybe you list grandparents, when your kids are little, you list grandparents as the financial guardians or as the actual guardians of your children. But then maybe your parents pass away and you never take the time to update your documents.
Right.
And now what? And usually, a contingent is established, but it's still good to review who did we actually list? Are those people still capable? Or maybe your parents are still alive, but as they've gotten older, maybe they don't have the capabilities to care for your kids anymore if something did happen to you.
Right.
So that's a good point. That's really important.
Yeah.
But what advice would you have for somebody who wants to get started? Kind of like, what are the first steps?
Honestly, asking friends, like, do you have an estate plan? Do you have a will? Where did you go? Did you have an attorney draw it up, or did you go online? Just getting opinions from other people who had an experience with it. And I think people get the plethora of experiences. The tricky part is just getting beyond the cost factor, because I think people they get turned off by it. But at the same time, it's like, this is really important. And if you don't establish it, again, the court is going to be making those decisions, regardless of the actual reality of it. And telling people just do it is just pick up the phone or email. Just get started that way. Because at least with our estate planning process, we walk people through it. And again, I just make sure that I explain every step. There are no stupid questions in estate planning.
Yeah.
There aren't. And my job is to forecast and try to future plan for all of my clients. That's hard too, and sometimes it's difficult if it's a blended family. I got to talk about the elephant in the room, and but I also use the psychology side of it, right? I try to avoid the word dead or die, even though I do death planning.
Yeah,
and I call them. My kids are always like, "What do you do?" And I say I create just in case plans for my clients.
Sure.
They're like, oh, I'm like, yeah. So like, just like if you need a piece of gum, I have it in my purse, right? It's just in case. So it's not as intimidating, but you really have to think about that aspect of it is think about the big picture.
Yep.
Who do you want making those decisions about raising your kids or getting your stuff, right? I don't want it to go somebody I don't really care for.
So we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, and I want to ask, where do you think some of the online sort of legal document preparation, online tools, where do you think that those fall short?
There are a lot more online will-making services post-COVID. And the thing is, they're not law firms. Even though it might have the word legal or law in the title, not law firms. Rocket Lawyer, I like to call Rocket. LegalZoom, Zoom. If you look at the small print on the bottom, they have to, by state law, say we are not a legal firm. We're not lawyers. And that's absolutely true. While the templates might have been drafted by lawyers and approved by lawyers, you don't know anything about the lawyers who drafted them. You don't know about the changes in the law, right? And that company online is probably not going to be as good about following up with you if the tax laws change, Or if you win the lottery, what do you need to do?
Right.
So that's the tricky part. And certainly, you don't need an attorney to draft a will. You could go to the library and get a, idiot's guide to creating a will. You could, but I don't recommend it.
Yeah.
But again, as Professor Erlanger always said, as you're just starting off, a simple basic will is just fine. So some of those online will making services are really trying to encourage more people to have an estate plan in place because it's so important. So there's that public interest side of it. But as you age and you have kids and you include pets in your family, you get married, your plan gets more complex, and you want to make sure that you cover every degree.
So you could see a service like that, or kind of maybe a basic will from the library, those templates. Those could be good for somebody who's younger, and it's kind of that just in case. But as people get older, they build families, they have more assets, their situation gets more complicated.
Yep.
That's the point when you think, now it's really important to go to an estate planning attorney. They're going to make sure that these documents are exactly what you need for your situation, and that everything is tailored to your state, because each state has their own laws. And that sounds like kind of that's that change piece, right? Is
Absolutely.
As you get more complicated, it becomes more and more important to not just kind of go with some template you got online,
right?
But actually work with an attorney.
Yes, I think so. Anything to do with the law and your most prized possessions and people in your life, let's get legit.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And, unfortunately, from the financial planning side, a lot of times we see, we'll encourage clients to, work with an estate planning attorney. Do you have an estate plan? Do you have a trust? These are a lot of questions we ask, especially onboarding new clients. And a lot of times we get the answer of yeah, we know we should do it. Yeah. And unfortunately, what really ends up lighting a fire under people is by being on the other side of it. A parent passes away, a sibling passes away, somebody in their life dies, and now they're the ones who are having to sort through their estate. And nothing gets them on board to planning their own estate like having to deal with somebody else's.
Bingo. And it's so funny you say that. I got a message on Facebook last night from a very good friend of mine. I haven't seen her for 35 years, but she knew I was in estate planning, and that's exactly what she wrote was, hi Notesong, my husband's father just died last night, and she said he needs an attorney. I'm like, I think your husband probably needs the attorney now. But yeah, and I don't know any information. And then she finished it with, and I should probably get my ducks in a row too.
Yep.
So right there. The other thing too is if parents are going on a big trip overseas, that's when we did our estate plan.
Yeah.
And then there's all sorts of different ways that you can use estate planning to pay the least taxes or make sure that most of the assets are going to your kids and not probate court, because all wills, regardless of the state, creates one for you because you didn't have one, or you have one very tailored to you, all wills have to go through probate, all of them. And that's a big surprise to people. But again, the topic is so, it's scary and it's yucky that people avoid it. So first question I ask is so tell me your basic understanding of wills, trusts, probate court. And I would say 90% of my prospective clients say, I don't know anything. So I give them the estate planning 101.
Yeah, that's great.
And then, but on that note too, financial planning, I get intimidated by that. It's a whole area that I have no idea. See, and I actually feel a little bit the same about estate planning when we kind of cross into the legalese, I'll say. Yes.
That tends to be, and I tell clients that is, we are not attorneys. We can't draft legal documents, and that's kind of outside of our area of expertise, right? But it is intimidating. But I find that fascinating because you think estate planning and financial planning are very related. A lot of coordination has to occur. A lot of our clients, we will actually talk with their estate planning attorneys to make sure that we're doing the stuff on our end correctly based on what they drafted with their clients, based on what their intentions were. So they work hand in hand, but are very much two separate areas. And so I find that interesting that you are then intimidated by the financial piece of it, and I'm intimidated by the legal aspect of it.
But they dovetail.
Yeah.
They work. That's another question I always ask prospective clients is, do you work with a financial planner? Oh, you don't? Well, Alicia and Mitch will take good care of it.
I love that.
But you also
Yeah.
give TLC, and I really love
Yeah.
that personal aspect of Wagner Condon because it's tailored to that person.
Yeah.
And you have to find a good fit, right? You don't want to work with somebody who, I think there's a video that Wagner Condon created of this scary, intimidating financial planner who talks down to you.
Yeah.
So, right.
You don't want to get the hard sell.
Right. No.
And, part of it is like, we're not here to sell you anything, right? So it's
Yes.
understanding,
Yes.
I think, whether it's an estate planning attorney or a financial advisor, it's understanding the business model. How are they getting paid? Are the fees transparent?
Yep.
What are their credentials, right?
Yep. Oh,
So
gosh,
what
yes.
if you're online and drafting a will, understanding that they're not an attorney, right? Or if they're a financial advisor, what are their credentials? Are they a financial salesperson, or do they have something? Are they a fiduciary, right? And a fiduciary is a fancy word, which means they have to act in your best interest.
Yep.
And not everybody has to do that. And so when it comes to whether somebody's an attorney or not, that's an important distinction. And in our side of the world, there's things like CFP. So like, I'm a certified financial planner, and that designation means something. Just like being an attorney, that means something, right? That gives you the power and the expertise and knowledge to do what needs to be done for the client.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, I think the thing that we are trying to help with is the future planning aspect of it, of your beneficiaries, right? The word beneficiaries has the benefiting the people that you love, that you get to choose. So there's so much that is woven together. And that's always my big takeaway is this is a great time to look at your beneficiary designated assets. They still look at me. What are those?
So I feel like that could be a whole nother topic. I feel like there's a lot of other things that we could talk about when it comes to estate planning and financial planning and how those two things work together. So I will leave that for part 2 of another episode that we will record. So I think now is a good time to kind of that basics of like, why is an estate plan important? Where do we get started? Just kind of emphasizing to clients how important it is. And we know it's scary, but if you find the right person, they will help you. They'll walk you through it. They'll use plain language. And if you don't feel comfortable, and if you feel like they're not doing those things, like if you feel like you don't really understand what's happening, then maybe that's not the right person, right? So sometimes it is about finding somebody that you feel comfortable with and that you trust when it comes to financial planning, estate planning, whatever it is.
Yep, you're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you.
Exactly. So I will end it here for today. And this has been another episode of Gimme Some Truth, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.
Wagner Condon Financial Advisors is a registered investment advisor with the SEC. Registration with the SEC does not imply a certain level of skill or training. The opinions expressed by the participants of this podcast are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Wagner Condon Financial Advisors. All statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. Thanks for listening, and for further information, please visit WagnerCondon.com.